Hi everyone, my name is Inanula and I share years of personal experience in the fashion industry, giving you key insights into buying and merchandising skills. So, today I'll be taking you through the fashion buying and merchandising critical path. In the fashion buying and merchandising process, one missed deadline can cost you an entire season. And here is how we make sure that never happens. We use a critical path. And the fashion buying and merchandising critical path is essentially a timeline with all the key tasks and deadlines that must be met to take a product from concept all the way through to store launch. And it's called critical because if any task is delayed, the entire project will be delayed. And this is particularly risky when you're dealing with trends because you have weather and selling seasons, and these are all very time sensitive. So if you miss your launch window, you could lose most of the season's sales. And so let's get into it. Here is a critical path template that I have put together, and all of my templates are available for download if you click the link below. Also, if you join the member newsletter, you'll receive plenty of other material too, regularly in your inbox, weekly templates, information, briefings, plus prize giveaways too. So make sure to join the member newsletter. So I'll take you through this critical path. And in the buying and merchandising process, once a range has been built and we know which products we are putting into our range, we would then start line planning. And a critical path comes out from your line planning. It's one of the stages within line planning, because what you're doing is now going down to the actual style. So you can see we've got the styles here and a bit more detail behind each of these styles, as we want to know each task, each stage, what is going to be needed to get this garment from just a sketch, a design as we've got it here, to a live product sitting in store ready to be sold. Right, so we do start with your PO information, and your PO is a purchase order. This is a document that's raised and sent to your supplier, and it will have all of this garment details, the different sizes, the units, and basically all of the information we've got here as well. So it would start with your order number, and that would be generated by the system you've used. And then also style number 2, that would go a bit deeper. There would then be a purchase order issue date, and that's just essentially the date that that purchase order was raised, and it would be raised by a buyer. And it's essentially the beginning of opening up that contract with your supplier to say, you are our chosen supplier for this style. And we are now opening a contract to say when this style needs to come into us, when you are going to make it, and in all of the details that we are specifying here today. Then we have your fabric details. That would be chosen by your buying and merchandising team, and the description as well would have been named by the team. Then we have our quantity. That would be decided by mainly merchandisers, because they would have handled the figures and decided how much are we buying of this style. And like I've mentioned in many other videos, for example, your trend analysis and all of that, we would have decided how much we are going to buy based on so many factors such as that. Then we have your image, which is obviously able to identify what style we're talking about. And this would have been drawn up by your design team. And so that would be a CAD, a computer aided design. They would have drawn that up for us based on either sampling or comp shopping, or we've been around to stores and said we want a top like this, but we want to make it different. And a common phrase in buying and merchandising is same but different. It's a very common phrase. We do our comp shopping, we'd see what's new, what's happening around, what are other stores and retailers doing, and we would come back and say, yeah, we'll do same but different. And difference can mean anything from we're adding our own little ruffle, or we're making it asymmetric instead of your usual design, and everything. And so that's that there. And then we have status, and that's the planned status, and then your actual status, what we have plotted down as how we want things to go. And then we know it's not always going to go to plan. And so we have actual as well. And that's why we always put in buffer time in each of these stages so that, we don't fall too behind. Next, you have a group of phases, which is listed here. And each of these phases have different tiny phases within them. So the first phase is your lab dip approval stage. Okay. Your lab dip approval stage has different phases within it, which are colorway. Then it has print strike-offs, and then it has comments received. Okay. And then so I'll go through these now. So colorway is applicable if you are doing a style in more than one colorway. And what you would do is you would get the fabric that's been identified here from this fabric column. And we'd say we're doing this fabric for this blouse. Now we want it lab dip approved. We need to see the colorway in an actual physical swatch from the actual supplier that they are actually going to sew it in. Because what happens a lot in sampling is they'll say, there'll be a lot of prototypes going back and forth, and they'll say, yes, it's going to look like this, but just in our fabric. And to avoid disappointment, we need to see that fabric done up in the actual colorway. And so that's what that stage is. Print strike off is if it's in a print. So this will be twofold if it's prints, because you'd still first do your colorway and then your print. But if this style, for example, is not printed, so we wouldn't need this stage. And then you would move on to comments received. And this is you as the buyer have said, we like this colorway, or we like this print strike off, this lab dip is approved. Then the supplier confirms that they have received your comment. That's what that stage is. And so these two stages have your 5 days for your print strike off, and also that would apply to colorway too. And then your 7 days after sending the lab dip. Okay. Then we would move on to sampling. Sampling has your style approval. That's now using the colorway lab dip swatch that we have seen. This has been sewn up into a sample, and we're looking at a physical garment now. The style approval phase, that takes 5 days for the supplier to send it over to you. You would have 5 days to respond and send your comments, right? And so then your style comments phase is 2 days. The supplier has 2 days to accept your comments and confirm that they have received your comments. Then we have your consumption calculation. Your consumption calculation is the supplier saying, this is how much fabric it takes us to get through this style. And they have 7 days after the style comments to get the consumption calculation going. Because what this does is this helps towards your BOM getting generated, your bill of materials. And this bill of materials takes 2 days within the critical path process. And your bill of materials is very crucial. That would include trims and buttons and zips and all of the little identified things that would have gone towards your consumption calculation, because they've said this is precisely down to the absolute penny of how much it costs per garment, because we need to know that exact cost. Then you would move on to more fabric details. So this is now, you've moved past your sampling phase. And when you move on to fabric details here, this is fabric details for production. And that might sound a bit confusing because it's like, oh, we've already done the fabric colorway and strike off here. But remember, these were swatches. And then for your sampling, this was just one garment sample, right? So now we need to see how it looks on a production scale, because what the supplier has done is they have gone and made a whole roll of this fabric from based on the approved swatches that we've done. And there will always be a variance, just ever so slightly. It's never really, well, it shouldn't be too variant from before, but you know, a swatch is a swatch and a huge roll is a huge roll, and it's going to look different. So that needs to be reapproved as well. So we have your fabric reference number as as confirmed from here, from the PO information. Then we have, your purchase order for your fabric, your trims, and your labels. All of that would take 1 day. So this is another like mini purchase order that's been raised to now buy on a production scale all of the trims, all of the zips. Because remember here, when we approved it on the sample, we were approving it on, remember that bill of material that got generated? We were approving it just for one style. But now it needs to be purchase order raised to buy for the whole 1,000 units that we've listed here. So we have 1 day for the purchase order. Then we have 25 days for the fabric, trims, labels, zips, everything to arrive into the supplier's factory for them to now be ready and in business to make. Then there would be a further 7 days for them to dye the fabric or do the prints, and that would take a further 7 days. So what usually happens here, I'll explain this a bit more because it might be confusing, is that yes, you have a supplier, but sometimes that supplier is using another supplier for their materials or their trims and things like that. Sometimes even for their fabric. Like it's supplying is a whole network, and sometimes as a retailer, it's easier to deal with what you'd call a third party, because you're dealing with just one person who you're talking to, and they would go and they would source from all of the various network of fabric suppliers, trim suppliers, label suppliers, and then bring that all back to you as a finished garment. Sometimes that would be the case. Otherwise, it would just be the fact that you are dealing with a supplier who is manufacturing it, but they still need to make orders too, just as any regular business, right? So that's what this stage all is here. We give them this lead time, these days, to handle that. Then you would have things like yarn, knitting, and dyeing and printing. And we would list down the day that they have started each of these and the finish date that they finished each of these, because that helps us in knowing where exactly we are in the process. And so for yarn, again, this goes down to how deep your supplier is. Sometimes your supplier is just buying the finished fabric, but sometimes your supplier is the mill and they're actually making the fabric. So all of these things need to be documented, just so that when we, as the buying and merchandising team, when we go into these meetings, we can say to our head of, or to even marketing and all of the other teams who want to know if the product is going to make launch, we want to be able to tell them in as much detail as possible, like, look, our product is currently on the mill, or our product is finished mill, it should be now going over to sewing stage, so this is very, very helpful. Right. After all of these, we then have your fabric ready date. And that's when you are ready to go and make the production of this style. We made the sample, which was 1 or 2. Sometimes there's salesman samples, which go up to about like 10 if you have different head offices. But anyway, now we are ready for production once we've come to fabric ready date. And so production status starts off with your size set submission. And what I will say about the critical path process is it's definitely not handled by the buying and merchandising team alone. Like, we do own it. We own this process. We are we are responsible for it moving along timely, but we rely on many other teams. Like, for example, I mentioned design with the CADs and even giving the fabric details, but there will also be now garment technicians and product developers and quality control teams who will help us with all of these sign-offs, with all of these approvals and comments. I mentioned the bill of material, PO generating, all of that would be not handled, but they would advise in this and they would help us. And every single week we would be going over to them with lab dips, would be going over to them for fittings if the sample has come in. So now with this size set submission, this is now needing to be submitted by a garment tech. And what we would have done is we would have had many meetings and collaborated with the garment tech team. And they have approved the measurements of each garment and each size as well. And they would have helped us with the comments. So that takes 2 days for each of those. Then there will be, a meeting. This production pricing meeting helps us identify the costs of production stage. And so again, that would take now 5 days. And your production pricing and calculation would take a further 5 days. Then you have pattern grading. Now we're collaborating with pattern cutters here because they would have graded up how the measurements are in each size, right? Because for production, we're dealing with a range of sizes within one garment. We're not looking at just the sample, which is usually a sample size 10 to 12. But here we want to know the measurements for all of the sizes, from as small as size 6 all the way up to your size 16, 18. And sometimes it depends on the size of the retailer you are and also the size of the supplier, but sometimes that's outsourced. For example, you have many retailers who handle this by letting the supplier use their own pattern cutters, and there wouldn't be necessarily a pattern cutter within the retailer, and that's fine too. But then there's also many retailers who feel like they are disappointed with the measurements of suppliers or they're not aligned with the same idea of how fits should be. And so they use their own pattern cutters and their own garment technicians. And that works fine too. So after your cutting, you will have embroidery, print, and wash. And obviously that depends on the garments that you're making. In the example of this garment, there's no embroidery, there's no print. But I will explain with wash. Sometimes, a garment will need to go through a wash just to take out that extra dye that's been in it. And sometimes it's just for purely design reasons. The maybe for this style, it needs a bit of that rugged look. And for things like denim, I know that's done a lot. For things like your cotton, that's done a lot. You want that washed look. But that takes 14 days. And so then you would move over to a recutting and a shaping phase. And so we cut the fabric after it was pattern graded. We cut out each size that we needed. We've embroidered it or printed it and, washed it. Now we are recutting and shaping those odd edges. We're making sure that before it goes into the sewing machine, it is correct. That would take 10 days to do. And then lastly, we get on to your stitching and your sewing. This is a 14-day lead time. And this is when all those sewing machines are going off. Your garment is now being sewn. All those pieces are coming together. Then there will be a finishing date. We want to identify that exact date. And we also want to identify the packing date. So again, that would be to update the team and to even celebrate your milestones. This is a very long process, but also a very exciting one if you're really anticipating a style. And so it's just great to document that date. And the supplier would be obliged to send you that date and say, today that has been done. Hopefully it would have been within the lead time agreed. And then you can go and update your team and say that what's happened, along with the packing date too. Lastly, we move on to the quality control. And quality control is now we're looking at the production garments, and we need to make sure they are all within what we call tolerance. There should be minimal problems at this stage. We shouldn't be having a sleeve hanging out of the armhole. It should all be very good and tidy. So we have testing that takes 10 days. And what the quality control team would do is, again, now with this quality control, this could be either handled by the supplier or it could be handled by the retailer, depending on the size or the style of how they decided to manage the workload. Because I do know many retailers do outsource this to supplier. They say, you handle the quality control, and just deliver us the finished goods. Or at the end of the production status, the supplier would send one of the production garments to the retailer for quality control, and the retailer would handle quality control. And then that's another team within that buying and merchandising would work with, because then we would have meetings with them and we would test out the production garment that's been sent over, and we would say the testing can be like wearer trialing and things like that, and stress testing as well. Sometimes you even get picked to wear a nice new garment. That's always fun. And you wear a trial something. That could be anywhere from a day of wear a trial up to a week. You never know. So lots of fun things do happen there. But that takes about 10 days. We want to make sure that we have really thoroughly made sure that this garment stays together and also survives different conditions. Like I mentioned with the back here with the wash, did that dye come out of that fabric well enough to not rub off on your nice white jeans? So yes, that would be that. And then you'd have your pre-shipment inspection. That would be handled by the supplier because obviously they have all of the production. So they need to do the pre-shipment inspection and they need to make sure that before they're shipping all of the quantity, things look good. Or they are catching the problems before they go on the ship. And there's nothing wrong with finding something wrong, because that's why we've put in this 7-day lead time, because then they would send it back to the seamstress or even all the way back to the pattern cutter. Or, well, if it's going as far back as the pattern cutter, then that means everything is wrong because it's all being cut in the same. But you know what I mean. They go back and fix these things, make amends. If it's a really big error, they would update the team. But, obviously, hopefully not. Then we move on to your shipment date. Again, a nice little date to update us with. And that would be the huge, hurrah, we have shipped the production. And the delivery date, lastly. These two dates, shipment date and delivery date, mark a whole new milestone, and they begin or trigger a whole new series of events, which is your phasing, intake, and delivery. Because then we would throw all of this information onto a delivery schedule. And that's another template that I do have and that I would be happy to take you through. Just send me a comment, a message, like and subscribe and all of that good stuff, and let me know your thoughts and tell me, what do you think and would you like to hear more? Then you have your remarks. Remarks are just simply comments or anything special that we needed to add or say, or if we know that this is a hugely anticipated style that needs to hit press as soon as it drops down, then that's definitely going in your remarks, Is it a hero product that's going to feature online and online need to get the first of that drop too? All of those kinds of things go in here, your remarks. And so that's really it. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to hear feedback and your thoughts. The Access to Fashion member newsletter gives you direct access to practical resources, buying and merchandising templates, and industry standard tools that are expert approved. Subscribe now and get immediate access to exclusive downloads and practical tools that will give you a real edge and keep you ahead of the curve. Visit the link below to join now.